loss is something that we all experience. I think it's it's a common human condition, and it's a cliche to say that if we love, then we'll lose. But as we grow older, the level of loss sometimes can become more intense, it's more rapid, and it's not always through death. We accumulate more losses, and sometimes they do seem very concentrated, or they all seem to happen at once. And I think we can probably think of many different losses in our own experience. So they can be through death, through loved ones, and also people who are part of our life story as we get older. People we knew when we were at school, people who were our neighbours, all those people who are part of our life. But we can have losses that are about, for example, family moving away and we don't see them as often. Our network of friends may reduce. And then we begin to have health issues. We might have chronic conditions which may affect our mobility. And of course, loss of sight and hearing can be very difficult. And one of the cruelest losses can sometimes seem loss of memory, whether that's about ourselves or someone close to us that we care for. Some people can't stay in their family home, and this can compound the other losses. And perhaps a bit more intangible can be loss of independence, learning to be dependent on others. And suddenly we have to be cared for rather than caring for others. We may feel as though we have lost our identity and status, especially if that was bound up with our work, whether it was paid work or volunteer work. And so many of our losses are invisible. And whilst I say they're more intense because they come all at once, they also sometimes build up slowly, and we become aware of them over a number of years. And I think it's absolutely clear that we need to grieve for these losses, just as we would over someone's death. And we need to give ourselves time and be given time. It's important that no one is shut down. It's important that people are able to talk about how they feel. And we understand a lot about how people grieve now through modern psychology and psychiatry. And obviously one of the most famous models of grieving is that by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who modeled 5 stages of grief. And whilst the model has been expanded and developed over the years, it's still a helpful framework to understand what's happening to us when we experience a loss. And one thing we're very clear about now is it's not a linear process, those stages of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. It's not something that we start at the beginning and go on through. We may go back through it. It's more like a spiral than it is a linear process. And most importantly of all, whether it's a loss through bereavement and death or a loss through some of the things I've identified, there's no right or wrong way to cope with loss. It's as individual as all of us here. Having said all that, there are obviously commonalities, and the stages of sadness, sorrow, anger, the what ifs, the regrets, even denial of what has happened, move on to acceptance. And working with our grief can be tiring and emotionally exhausting. And glib comments about getting over it or getting closure are not helpful at all. And I sometimes cringe when I hear that when there've been real tragedies and we hear about it in different parts of the world, and then people are asked if they've had closure. Accepting the feelings is really important. Another authority on grieving, which many of you may have heard of, is a man called David Kessler, who's now regarded as one of the world authorities on grief. And he worked with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross as a younger man and has been passed on the mantle, really, of her work. And his most recent book identified an additional stage of grieving, and he talks about finding meaning. But however, before we're able to find meaning, we need to deal with all the strong emotions that we might feel about loss. And I think we don't need to feel guilty about our emotions or worry about our emotions. They are what they are. And he uses, in one of his explanations about dealing with emotions, an analogy about buffaloes in Montana, slightly unexpected when I saw it. But he remembers watching a documentary. And Montana in the United States, you know, the massive areas of cattle and buffaloes. And what they do is they run into the storm, thus minimizing how long they will be in it. They don't ignore it or run away for it or just hope it will go away, which perhaps what some of us may do when we want to avoid our storms of emotions. Because what we don't realize by doing this, that we are maximizing our time in pain. If we face our pain and allow it to take its natural course, eventually the pain will pass or will be not as intense, and we can come through the other side. George Eliot said in Middlemarch, interesting, I think it's probably the words of Dorothea, our losses, whenever they occur, change us, and they are always part of us. So that's my challenge again, I think, and the challenge to us about our losses and grief and bereavement is with us and becomes part of us. And we're not the same person once it's happened. Research on healthy aging and resilience has identified many factors that identify why there are differences in the way people cope with these losses. There are some protective factors. If we already have a supportive network, if we still have family around, if we have positive life experiences to draw on, if we're able to accept help. And a really common thing which seems to mean that people are able to cope with losses better is to be able to have gratitude. And this is not just for older people. You may have come across this, that the happiest people are the people who every day are able to be grateful, hard though that might be. And those people who take up new opportunities, no matter what the challenges are. And so even as an older person, we can carry on building a future. It'll be different, but it can be full of different opportunities. And again, David Kessler has an analogy. A broken crayon can still colour. So he suggests that finding meaning seems to be linked to adapting and coping with loss. And we can think of lots of high profile people who have been bereaved who find meaning. Some people do fundraising campaigns around perhaps the disease that a relative died of. Some people work on seeking justice if there's been some injustice. And perhaps some of us find meaning in our faith. Does God have a purpose for us now in these later years of our life? Is there an opportunity? Have I always been a Martha in the story in the gospel when Jesus goes to the house of Martha and Mary? Or could I be a Mary? Is this an opportunity? There's always a choice, and to find meaning is a choice. So I hope we'll explore some of that, and you'll share with us eventually in the breakout groups how you found it trying to cope with loss and trying to find meaning.